Ralph Garcia this is Ralph Garcia with the City of Santa Clara. I'm a senior civil engineer with the Traffic Engineering Division. I'm managing this project from the city side. This is the Monroe Street Bikeway Study, Phase 3 Community Workshop. Tonight we'll be going over some of the corridor analysis and provide a way you can have your preferred design concept presented to the city through a survey. This is Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. And this project is partially funded by the Measure B program from VTA. So tonight we have Jeff Knowles from Alta joining us, and he'll take you through the rest of the slides. So Jeff?
Great. Thanks so much, Ralph. And thanks to the folks that have joined us here tonight and will be watching this recording later. As Ralph mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. It's going to be posted on the project website following this meeting. If you need to drop off in advance before the meeting's over, there's a couple ways you can connect with us about this project. You can send us a voicemail message. The number there is 408-320-7060. You can email us. Our email is monroestudy@altago.com. Or you can visit the website that has lots of information about previous meetings. All that's been posted. There's an FAQ. If you have some questions that you might have, there might be some answers to that at santaclaraca.gov/bikeped projects. So again, if you need to drop off early, there's no problem with that. We'll have this meeting recorded and posted on the website. You can come back to it later. Next slide, George. So the agenda for our meeting tonight, we're going to go through some introductions. I'm going to give you a project overview and share with you community feedback that we've heard so far about this bikeway study. I'm going to introduce the roadway concepts that have been revised based off of community feedback. I'm going to share with you some collision, traffic, and parking analyses that we've done for each of the roadway concepts, and then talk to you about next steps. Again, we're at the stage here where we're looking for additional feedback from the community about their preferred option so that we can put that into a report and share that with the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and then eventually the City Council to make a decision. Next slide. So introductions. Ralph has introduced himself. Ralph Garcia is with the city. He's the project manager on this study. Michael Liu is Assistant Public Works Director. Steve Chan, the Transportation Manager, and Carol Shariat is the Principal Transportation Planner. Those four members of the city staff are all intimately involved with this project. My name is Jeff Knowles. I'm a Principal Planner at Alta Planning and Design. We're the consultants hired by the city to support them in this bikeway study. I'm joined by my colleague, George Foster, as well. Next slide. There are 4 phases to this planning process. In phase 1, this is where we're gathering information from the public as well as some data and analyzing that existing conditions. In phase 2, we were taking that information, developing and sharing out roadway concepts. These were early initial drafts of what could be done to change the roadway to incorporate better bikeways. Phase 3 is where we are today. This is where we're reviewing that technical analysis and sharing out revised concepts. At this point, we're looking for the public to help us select a preferred concept to go to City Council. And then phase 4, the next phase, City Council will review and consider how to move forward. As a background, there's no funding at this stage for future fully developing the concepts. We're just here to get information about next steps. Next slide. In terms of our schedule, I'm in those 4 phases. We had our first round of workshops last May to introduce the project and gather initial ideas. We held our second set of meetings in September to share those early draft concepts. And this is our third round of meetings tonight. Next slide. And I should mention where we're going from here. We'll have a BPAC meeting, and then City Council is scheduled tentatively for late summer, early fall. All right, so I want to give you a little bit of background about the project. If you're coming in new to this project, you can go to the next slide. The study corridor is on Monroe from Lawrence Expressway to the San Tomas Expressway. This is a map that just shows that. As you can see, the corridor is primarily fronted by residential homes, There's also a school, it's Wilcox High School, right in the middle of this study corridor. Next. In terms of roadway characteristics between Lawrence and San Tomas, it's 1.7 miles long. It varies between 4 and 5 traffic lanes. The posted speed limit is 35 miles per hour. Within the project area, there are currently no bicycle facilities, but bike lanes start on Monroe Street east of San Tomas. The corridor is primarily fronted by residential uses and Wilcox High. Next. Our first phase of engagement involved 2 community meetings, workshops, an online survey, and we had 2 pop-up events along with meeting with the BPAC, which is the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Phase 2, we had 2 additional workshops, another online survey. We had additional pop-up meetings, which are events that we go out, hold in the community. Our staff and team met with the city's Youth Commission, the city's Senior Advisory Commission, Parks and Recreation Commission, and again with the BPAC. And in phase 3, which is where we're at tonight, we're holding a public meeting. There'll be an online survey, which we're going to talk about and share a link to. We have tentatively scheduled a pop-up event, and then we'll also be meeting with the BPAC to share this information. Next. Hopefully you saw us at the city's Art and Wine Festival back in September. We also were at the Christmas tree lighting in December. These are our pop-up events where we had a booth sharing out information with boards and gathering survey information and public input about each of the concepts. Next. In our most recent survey, survey number 2, we had 118 responses, of which 15% were affiliated with Wilcox High School. We asked for the level of support and feedback on each of the proposed concepts. Respondents that were affiliated with Wilcox High School wrote that they desired dedicated bike lanes and protected biking represented by concepts B and C, which we'll share out in just 1 minute. Next. Some of the results of these concepts, again, there were 3 concepts that we're asking for feedback on. Concept A is 2 lanes, center turn lane, adding buffered bike lanes continuously along the corridor, and retaining parking on both sides of the street. That received fully support at 28%, 28.6%. Concept B, which is going down to 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction, a center turn lane, and then parking protected bike lanes. That was 51.2% was fully supported. So this was the largest body of support for this concept. And then concept C was 4 lanes, a buffer bike lanes, and removing parking on one side that had 27.2%. And you can see here the ranking was fully support. People could support a concept with minor changes, needs major changes to get my support, or I do not support this concept. And you can see that I do not support this concept about 20%, and for concept A and B, very large, about 40% for concept C. Next slide. So that was the full 118 responses. When we look just at the Wilcox High School, which, mind you, is just 18 of those responses, we wanted to kind of zero in on what the high school community was desiring. For them, the concept C, which is a buffered bike lane and removing parking on one side, was the largest support at 60%. They're about evenly split in terms of do not support between A and B. 33% also for concept B. So a little bit different from the population as a whole for this study, for this survey, sorry. Next slide. So I want to go through again, if you've joined us at earlier meetings, you've seen these concepts, but I want to walk you through them again and then share with you some of our analysis. So next slide. First is the no build option. This is your current conditions. So if the city were to move forward with not changing anything, this is what the street looks like today and would look like in the future. So under this scenario, there are 4 traffic lanes and parking on both sides of Monroe. The vehicle travel lanes are 11 to 12 feet wide, and the curb to curb width of the street is 64 feet, including the gutter. The public right-of-way is 90 feet wide. Next. This condition varies from Calabasas Boulevard to Cromite Drive, where there is a two-way left turn lane, parking only along the north side of the street and parking restricted along the south side of the street. This condition also varies from Cromite Drive to San Tomas Creek Trail, where the vehicle travel lanes are 10 feet wide, and there's a 5-foot wide bike lane and parking on each side of the street. Next slide. So again, the purpose of the study is to look and see if there's potential for adding continuous bike facilities at a higher level of comfort for bicyclists and to make improvements along the corridor. So concept A is the first concept that makes some changes to the roadway. This concept removes one travel lane in each direction and adds a two-way center turn lane, left turn lane. Parking is maintained on both sides of the street. An 8-foot wide buffered bicycle lane, also known as a class 2 bicycle lane, is added to each side of the street with 5 foot for the bikeway and 3 foot for painted buffer. Next slide. On this segment in front of Wilcox High School, because there's no parking on the south side already in front of the school, the bikeways are wider with an 11-foot wide buffered bike lane on the south side in front of the school and a 9-foot wide buffered bike lane on the north side in front of the residencies. Next slide. Concept B. Under this concept, very similar to concept A, we remove one travel lane in each direction and add a two-way center left turn lane. An 8-foot wide separated bikeway, also known as a class 4 bikeway, is added on each side of the street in this concept, with 5 feet for the bikeway and 3 foot of the buffer. Parking is maintained on both sides of the street, but it's positioned outside the bikeway to act as a vertical separation or barrier between the bikeway, people biking, and vehicle travel lanes. And so this concept here is something that's seen in city of San Jose. Cupertino has been using this design as well. It's the greatest physical separation and provides the greatest buffer and comfort for people in the bikeways. Next slide. On the segment in front of Wilcox High School, because there's no parking in the south side from the school, the bikeways are wider, again, with 11-foot wide buffered bike lanes at the south side of the street in front of the school with a physical barrier, and then a 9-foot wide parking protected bike lane on the north side in front of the residences. Concept C. This concept maintains 4 travel lanes, but it removes 1 parking lane. The side of the street where parking would be removed has not been determined in this concept. That would happen at a later phase if the city wanted to move forward in determining that, but we've gone through some analysis about that impact. A 7-foot wide buffered bike lane, a class 2 bike lane, is added to each side of the street with 5 feet for the bikeway and 2 feet for the painted buffer. Next slide. On the segment in front of Wilcox High, again, because there's no parking on the south side, there's less space for bikeway implementation. With an 8-foot wide buffered bike lane on the south side, in front of the school, again, that would have a physical barrier, and a 5-foot wide bike lane on the north side in front of the residencies. That would have no buffer. Concept C along Wilcox removes all parking along the segment. The other sections along concept C still have parking on one side. So again, just in front of the high school, parking would need to be removed on the north side for this concept. Next slide. Now I'm going to walk you through collision, traffic, and parking analyses for each of these concepts. So for collision analysis, from 2017 into 2022, which is the 5 years that we had the most recent collision data, there were 130 vehicle-to-vehicle collisions and 9 collisions involving a bicycle and a motor vehicle. These numbers serve as the baseline for the no build or your existing conditions concept. This is what we would expect kind of this baseline to continue for the next 5 years if no concepts were implemented. The analysis estimates how many collisions would have been avoided during the same time period if each concept was built. So in concept A, which is again is the 2 lanes, center turn lane, buffered bike lanes, and parking on both sides, using national research about how these different concepts affect collisions, we anticipate there would be 45 fewer vehicle collisions and 2 fewer bicycle collisions. So that would be cumulatively 47 fewer collisions under concept A. In concept B, which is the 2 lanes, center turn lane, and parking protected bike lanes, it's anticipated there would be 45 fewer collisions and 5 fewer bicycle collisions. So again, this concept has that parking protected bike lane, so having greater safety impacts for the bicyclists. Under this, cumulatively, we anticipate or estimate 50 fewer collisions under concept B. Under concept C, since there's no road diet, which is really where research has shown the greatest safety impacts or collision reduction impacts, there'd be no vehicle collision reductions anticipated, but there would be 2 fewer bike collisions anticipated. So cumulatively 2 fewer collisions under concept A. That's concept C, excuse me. Next slide. In terms of traffic analysis, we modeled the changes in travel time that it would take to travel this corridor. Again, it's 1.7 mile corridor from end to end. Currently, it takes 10 minutes, 25 seconds during your AM, your peak period in the mornings if you're going westbound. We anticipate with the lane removal concepts, which are concepts A and B, that would increase by 76%. So an additional 7 minutes and 52 seconds to travel the corridor at this high demand period. Under the afternoon period, it currently takes 6 minutes and 45 seconds. And our estimates using our traffic model mean a 31% increase or an additional 2 minutes under the concepts A and B. We also modeled the midday at 7 minutes, and that would increase to 8 minutes and 34 seconds, so an extra minute and 34. And then on Saturdays, we looked at that also as well, and there'd be very minimal impact in travel time. On the eastbound direction, during the AM peak period, it would have a very small increase, less than 10%, at about 40 seconds increase. The PM peak period would increase by 20%, so an additional 2 minutes and 16 seconds. And then the midday would go 24% increase, so an additional minute and 46 seconds. Then on Saturday, a 27-second increase. We think that the difference between the AM peak period westbound traffic and the eastbound PM period traffic is because a lot of that school traffic during drop-off is all concentrated in that AM peak period. It's people commuting and also people getting to Wilcox High School. During drop-off, which is more in the midday period, that helps dissipate some of the travel demand on this corridor. So that's where we're seeing not as high of eastbound PM period delay. So just wanted to mark that. There would be an impact to travel times on the corridor under concepts A and B. Next slide. We also looked at the level of service, or LOS, at the intersections, many different intersections along the corridor and also along side streets and parallel corridors to evaluate what those impacts would be at intersections. LOS uses traffic speeds, traffic volumes, and the density of vehicles to evaluate roadways. And each intersection is scored, getting a letter score from A to F. Low LOS scores of A through D indicate to the city that the intersection operates at a level that meets the city's standards. A through E are acceptable for county expressways, like at intersections that cross or intersect with San Tomas Expressway or Lawrence Expressway, along with state highways. LOS E and F indicate substandard intersection operations for the city streets, and F for county expressways and state highways. Next slide. So when we analyzed our 25 intersections in the study area and on side streets and parallel streets, currently, in today's conditions, which would be the no-build condition and concept C, 21 of your intersections meet city standards, 4 currently do not. In the PM peak period, 22 meet standards and 3 do not. Midday, all 25 operate at the city's standards, and 25 on Saturdays meet the standards. Under concepts A and B, we see a change. 20 out of the 25 would meet standards. An additional one, so bring it up to 5, would be substandard. And that's at Monroe and Bowers. Under the PM peak period, there also would be an increase of that one intersection, Monroe and Bowers, going up from 3 at substandard today and 4 under these concepts. And there would be no additional change at the midday or on Saturdays. Next. We've mapped that out here. You can see everything that's showing as green are the intersections that currently meet city standards. We've got it split in half. So on the left half, that's the AM peak period. So we can imagine where there's the highest demand, kind of the worst congestion available on these streets that are stressing these intersections. And on the right side, we have the PM peak periods looking at those. So you can see here today's conditions, where it stacks up along the corridor on Monroe and at those intersections along Walsh and down on Cabrillo, we looked at as well. So if you look at concepts A and B, next slide, you can see the only change here for both the AM period and the PM peak periods are here at Bowers and Monroe. And again, concepts A and B are the lane removal concepts. Next slide. We also looked at parking analysis. Monroe Street accommodates currently, we're calculating 318 parking spaces along the study area and 884 parking spaces on the immediate side streets. That's looking 500 feet up on both sides from every Monroe Street intersection. We looked at utilization rates, calculating the number of parking spaces available by the number of parking spaces that we counted. We counted these spaces on weekdays and weekend mornings, afternoons, and overnight. And so under your existing or no build concepts A and B that do not affect parking, 38% is your overall. And on the north side of Monroe, slightly higher demand or utilization, 39% of available parking spaces are typically used on the north side of Monroe. On the south side of Monroe, typically 36% of available spaces are used. So about 3 or 4 out of 10 available spaces are typically taken. And then the same is true for on the side streets, about 37% of the side streets are typically parked in. Under concept C, this is where the city would need to remove parking on one side, and we modeled it for both sides of the streets to see what that impact would be. So under each scenario, the city assumed the vehicles that typically park on, let's say, the north side of north or south side of Monroe would park across the street, and then they would occupy up to 100% of the typically available spaces for each of those blocks. And if there's not enough parking directly across the street to meet the demand, the analysis assumes that the remaining demand would be met by parking on the closest side street. So when we model that out, what we show here is that we're estimating that the demand would increase on the north side of Monroe from 39% to 49% if we removed parking on the south side and moved that all to the north side. And on the south side, it would go from 36% up to 56% if we removed the north side and moved it down to the south side. So again, going from about 3 or 4 out of 10 spaces available to about 5 out of 10 spaces available. Next slide. We mapped this as well. This is your current condition, the average parking occupancy during those peak periods. As you can see here, during peak periods, most on-street parking is readily available, shown in green, so greater than 50% of available parking is available. Really on the eastern side of the corridor, it starts to get less demand, harder to park, and you can see in red and orange, that's the areas where we get 30 to 15% of parking is available, and red is less than 15% of parking is available. That's really, if you look at Calabasas Boulevard heading west, it starts to get higher demand under current conditions. Next slide. This map shows the anticipated or the estimated impact of parking removal if we took parking off of the north side of Monroe and moved the majority of it to the south side. Again, there could be available parking on the eastern side to accommodate that change. You can see here in green and yellow, but there would be higher demands certainly going west. More of that would go into some of the side streets and onto the south side of Monroe. So it would have an impact to available parking under this scenario. Again, this would go from 36% available typically on the south side to 56% utilized. Next slide. And then the flip side of this, if we took the south side of Monroe off to accommodate that bicycle facility and moved it to the north side, very similar situation where the east side of the corridor could accommodate that using available parking on street or on the side streets. But really going Meadowbrook Drive heading west becomes more higher demand, less availability for parking, more difficulty finding available on-street parking. Again, in this scenario, it goes from 39% today to 49% utilized across the corridor. All right, next slide. So I want to walk you through some next steps, and then we'd love to hear from folks who are on the call tonight and answer your questions or get your feedback. Next slide. Again, just to flash up, here we are and the schedule. We are looking forward to collecting information from you here tonight, from the public, through these workshops, through our online survey, which we're going to share with you in just 1 second. We'll be going to the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and then we will be going to council in late summer, early fall for their review and consideration for next steps. All right, next slide. There are lots of ways that we invite you to stay involved in this project. The best resource right now is the project website. That's santaclaraca.gov/bikeped projects. You can send us an email, monroestudy@altago.com. You can call and leave us a voicemail message. Our number is 408-320-7060. Again, we don't have the staff to provide calls back or to answer the phone, but if you want to leave a voicemail message, if emails or using the internet is not your preferred way to communicate, we wanted to provide this resource. You can attend future public meetings. We don't have additional community workshops, but there will be public meetings available, including our upcoming BPAC meeting, which is going to be held on Monday, January 22nd. Mostly the same information that we're sharing tonight will be shared with the BPAC to get their feedback, but you're more than welcome to attend that. There's also the fall city council meeting. You can check the website for updates when that is scheduled, or you can get an email update from us if you request to be added to our subscriber list. Just send us an email, again, monroestudy@altago, and ask to be put on the email updates, and we'll share that out once that meeting is scheduled. At this stage, George, my colleague, is going to share out the survey link. There's a QR code. If you've got a phone available or want to take that, you can click over, and I'm going to share with you what the survey looks like. This is really where we're really hoping that you can share this with your neighbors, with your friends and family, with work colleagues, other members of the city. We want to get a robust response to this survey. So, George, if you can share the survey link, and then I'm going to show the members of the public who are here with us tonight what that survey looks like. So when you click on the link that's being circulated now, it will take you to a SurveyMonkey website. They'll give you some brief information about the study. There's a link to the city project website, which looks like this. Again, it's got all the information that I shared with you tonight, along with past meetings and recordings from those meetings, and also additional project documents. The survey asks you some background information about your relationship to the study corridor, whether you live or work on the street, you attend or work at Wilcox High School, just travel the corridor regularly, We ask how you heard about the project. Again, this helps the city understand how it's doing in terms of getting the word out. We've shared out postcards to near neighbors. We've made efforts to publicize this on the city's website using social media accounts, emails, and project signs that were placed along the corridor. Then we get into the survey itself, and this is a ranked choice survey. Again, the idea here is we're really trying to get to the point where we can understand the community's preferred concept. There's first is a link that will take you to a high resolution PDF of all the Monroe Street concepts that I shared with you tonight in this presentation, including those concepts that involve Wilcox High School sections. So you can click that, download that, and have that open to review and cross-check the concepts. The project has 4 alternatives or 4 concepts that we've walked through this evening: the no build, concept A, which is the buffered bike lanes with lane removal, vehicle lane removal; concept B, the parking protected bike lanes with parking with a vehicle lane removal; and then concept C, which are the buffered bike lanes with 1 lane of parking being removed. So this is question 3, which is really the most important question to answer when you're taking the survey. For this section of Monroe Street, rank the concepts from best to worst bikeway option in your opinion, where first choice represents your most preferred alternative and 4th represents your least preferred alternative. You need to pick at least your top choice. You can choose to not vote for other choices, but no votes will be considered as do not support. So for the ranked choice to work properly, it's ideal if you can list out really what are your first, second, third, and 4th choices for each of these concepts. So if your first choice concept is parking, concept B, we would list that there. Concept A, maybe is your second choice. Maybe your 3rd choice is the existing conditions, no build, and your least preferred is concept C. You could do it like this, and each of these can be changed. Again, you need to list at least your top choice, your preferred option, and ideally you would list your second, third, and 4th options as well. The survey includes a thumbnail and additional information just to remind you if you want to review these concepts again, with the dimensions and showing the changes to the roadway concepts. Question 4 is optional. You can provide reasons or rationale for why you supported your preferred concepts, or you can leave general comments about the project for the city to review. And then also, if you want to be notified about updates, you can, including any future events, you can provide your email address. And just as a note, your email address is not going to be associated with your responses. We'll keep that in a separate subscriber list just to kind of make sure that you get updates about those future events. Once you're done, you click submit there, and it will go into the survey results. So I'm going to stop sharing. Again, during the course of this meeting, you can click on the link that's now in the chat window. It's got the SurveyMonkey link. It'll take you there. That concludes our presentation tonight. I just want to say thank you for attending. I appreciate your attendance here, and we look forward to answering questions. So at this stage, we're going to turn on the ability for you to raise your hand. There's also a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. If you'd like to type out a question, we'll be answering those as well. So again, if you'd like to come off of mute, please raise your hand. That'll indicate that you'd like to speak. At this stage, George, will you just flash up the slide that has how to stay in touch with us? Yeah, that's great right there. So if you have questions tonight about the concepts, about some of the analysis or the impacts that each of these concepts would have, about collision or safety, about travel times and congestion, or about parking, we'd love to hear your questions and provide additional clarification. If you have questions about how to take the survey, we can also answer your questions that, or accept any other feedback you have about this project. So at this stage, I'm going to look at my window to see if anybody has raised their hand, and we can bring you off of mute to share your question or your comment. Okay, I see Tom is here with their hand up, so I'm going to take you off of mute. Go ahead, Tom.
Hello there. Yes, my name is Tom Freitas. I'm a member of the Senior Advisory Commission, and I was speaking for our seniors in our area. You know, I find myself riding a bike more than I ever have. I find it very convenient going from place to place within our community. And that particular Monroe that you show in the last slide, that corner going around 25-mile-an-hour turn, unfortunately, the cars are coming around 35, 40 miles an hour. And I come out of that one section of town into that corner. So I just wanted to say that I love this project. The other thing is I would like to see this project be one of the most, pristine projects that we put in the city. That is for bicycles. Fully protected lanes are important. I think it could be a real benefit to see the best we can do on Monroe Street. The other thing is I would like to see is more crosswalks. Have you done a survey of the accidents that occurred, pedestrian accidents and collisions with pedestrians? There are two of them that I know of, and one of them was an older woman that was taken out, you might say, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. And I'd like to see crosswalks. It's a long stretch from Kylie and Bowers, actually, going west to the high school. Cars speed up before they just get to that turn, and they coming off that stoplight, and that's where that woman got killed. And I must say, it's shocking and thought provoking to think that all we needed really is a crosswalk. It might have slowed the individual down. There's no crosswalks for quite a long ways, and so I'd like to have that looked at. That's about all I have to say, and I thank you very much for your time. And honestly, this looks like a great thought out project. I'd like to be part of it. Wonderful. Keep it up.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tom, thanks, Tom, so much for your feedback. Thanks for
Sure.
being here. And appreciate that. There was a question that Tom had about will this project include improvements for pedestrians? Ralph, do you want to answer that about how this project could support pedestrian comfort and safety?
Yeah, so we have not gone into that level of detail of the design. If there is to be a new bike lane added, of course, we'll need to look at those in the design details. So it could potentially add some safer, or I guess enhanced safety crossing options at different crosswalks or different intersections, if possible.
I will mention that under concepts A and B, which have the lane removal, that would have some benefits for people crossing the street. It would narrow the distance or the length of exposure that people would be in a crossing scenario, and also make it safer for people crossing the street. So there could be some spillover benefits depending on the concept of the city, if the city decided to move forward on this project. So there would also be potential improvements with the road diet under concept A and D, with slowing travel speeds down, which would have improvements for people driving along with people biking or walking. So there could be, again, spillover benefits. Thanks for that comment and that question, Tom. Next up with the hand raised, I see Patrick. Patrick, I'm going to take you off of mute. Please go forward with your comment or question.
Hello, my name is Patrick. I've lived in Santa Clara for probably 10 or 12 years now. Very interested in this project, Monroe study, as well as the Benton Bikeway study. I live just a bit off of Benton, so that one's very appealing to me, but Monroe would also be a great avenue for cyclists to get around the city a lot safer. I have a few questions. I'll start with the first one, which I already put into the Q&A about traffic analysis. I was curious if vehicle speed was factored into the estimated travel time changes, kind of piggybacking off of one of Tom's concerns, which is the frequency of vehicle speeding along the corridor. Speeding, obviously, exponentially increasing the risk of not only crashes and collisions, but also fatalities from those collisions. So did that analysis include any monitoring of speeding or vehicle speeds along the corridor? I'm assuming the vehicle speed in the estimated time, travel time changes is because of reducing lanes would overall reduce vehicle speed if everyone were going at exactly the speed limit along the corridor. Is reducing vehicle speed along the corridor a priority for increasing not only cyclist but also pedestrian safety? So just kind of a few questions around vehicle speed, how that was measured, if it factored into the traffic and safety estimates.
Thanks so much. Certainly, thanks, Patrick, for being here. Thank you for your comment and your question. In terms of analyzing that, under the concepts A and B, which removes a vehicle lane in each direction, what that does is right now there's 2 travel lanes. And so if you are intent on exceeding the speed limit, you can move around and weave among traffic. The road diet under concepts A and B means that the safe and prudent driver sets the speed limit for the rest of folks behind them. And so there is a speed reducing impact under concepts A and B. Under these conditions, under AM peak period, where it saw the greatest dramatic increase, that 76% increase in travel time, that would just because of the congestion. So we would not see really widespread exceeding the speed limit just because the volumes would be so high during that situation. Ralph, is there anything else you wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the effect of putting in the bike lanes by reducing the number of travel lanes does have that added benefit of reducing speeds and narrows the focus of the lane. It also puts in the 2-way left turn lane if we're looking at, I think, concepts A and B, which also provides some safety benefit. So potentially we do reduce speeds, and yes, I think that is something that's factored into analyzing the number of collisions that might be reduced from each project scenario.
So hopefully that answered your question. And if not, please put your hand back up and we can try and answer it again. Okay, next up, I'm going to answer one from the Q&A window here. Brendan King says, "Hi, sorry for joining late, so I missed a large portion of the material. Does this or any related study cover Monroe Street between San Tomas and El Camino Real? It looks like this covers the section after San Tomas, but wasn't sure if other sections were also under review." Brendan, thanks for joining us. And again, this meeting is all being recorded and will be posted on the website. So if you missed anything, that will be shared out later next week. But this study corridor is really from San Tomas Expressway to Lawrence Expressway, 1.7 miles under that scenario. And it's looking to add continuous, connected, and comfortable bikeways in that section. So not approaching El Camino Real. All right.
Jeff, can I just add something? Really
yeah, Ralph, if you want to get more context about how this was picked.
We did get the Measure B grant, and as part of that to look at implementing new bike facilities. So that segment from I believe San Tomas to El Camino does have existing bike lanes. So this is really to add that connection where it's missing that segment from Lawrence to San Tomas.
Next up, I see Zach with hand raised. Go ahead, Zach. I'm going to take you off of mute and go ahead with your feedback or with your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep, thanks for being here.
Great. I just wanted to ask, I had a concern about a lot of the bike items that are put lead to a lot of car damage where they're in the lanes. I took a picture the other day, I can email it to the study, showing at the large turn there just past Wilcox. That turn, there already are a set of white markers were added recently, I think in the last year or so, and many of them are destroyed, leading to significant vehicle damage. And I would assume a lot of that's not included in your statistics. You know, if someone hits their bumper on it, they're unlikely to file a formal accident report or have a police report for it. And I just worry about all the cost to motorists of having these barriers in the middle of the road. I've seen a lot of places like in Cupertino and others where they put bollards in places drivers aren't expected them, and they're all have been hit repeatedly. And so I know when we discussed this, the last meeting you mentioned there's like a maintenance issue, but I just worry about a big expense for the citizens of Santa Clara and making sure that people who drive reasonably in the middle of the street don't have obstacles to avoid, especially if it's at night or for someone who's not familiar with that street. And I also just wanted to ask, that was one comment, and then I wanted to mention about parking. I noticed a lot of your parking statistics were averaged across the day. And I noticed that since it's a residential neighborhood, a lot of the parking is full in the evenings when people come back to their residence at night to sleep. But then when they're out working, so if you average a midday and a night, and then you say it's a 50% utilized, it sounds like there's a lot of space all the time. But in fact, a place that's 100% full every night and empty every afternoon is a full place where there's no extra parking frequently. And I see that in the parts of Monroe Street that are very close to where I live. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Zach, for those comments. And thanks for sharing additional photo evidence with us by our email address. Again, if anybody else has any additional thoughts after this meeting and wants to share them with us, monroestudy@altago.com. So thanks for sharing all of those comments and additional considerations that the city would have to take as they moved, if the city moved forward with a detailed design. That'd be the next phase of thinking about how would any barriers be constructed, what reflective material would need to be added to those to make sure that at night drivers were aware of these different barriers, where they'd be placed to avoid impacts, and any sort of education that would need to happen to inform drivers about the changes in the roadway and these different barriers or different designs that would happen. I appreciate all of that. And thanks again for that comment about the parking analysis. And it's true, we looked at the highest demand periods during the AM period, middle of the day, evening, and overnight. And we did average those kind of high demand areas together. And we could go into more detail and look up some more information to see how much that is a difference between the overnight and those other different periods. I don't have that right in front of me at this moment, but I recall the overnight was only slightly higher than some of the other periods. It really wasn't skewing one way or the other, but again, I could look more closely at that. We could share more information and post that on the website. So thanks for those comments. Appreciate you being here. All right, next up, Kevin, I'm going to take you off of mute and go ahead with your comment or question, Kevin.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I'm a bicycle commuter about 2 to 3 days a week. I bike down Monroe Street. And if there were a bike lane, I would bike all the way to Evelyn. As it is, I typically go onto side streets. So I'm really excited about really any of the options that would incorporate bicycle lanes along Monroe Street. I was curious, you showed the timeline of council review for a project like this after a particular option is chosen, if it were one of the build options. Do you have an idea of how long typically it would take for this to be implemented? What's a typical timeline for that? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for being here and for that question. Ralph, do you want to answer that question about kind of what happens after city council reviews this, and kind of if they did decide to move forward, what a typical kind of schedule would look like in terms of getting something on the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as Jeff mentioned earlier, this is just the planning study to see the preferred design concept. We do not have any funding right now for construction. So if City Council decides to move forward with a preferred design option that includes the implementation of a bike facility, I would assume the next step would be for us to try to secure funding, probably through grant application. So there's several grant opportunities we can apply for to get awarded a construction grant. So just stay tuned on that. There'll be more updates, and we'll let you know our progress as we move forward.
Great. Okay. Let's see. Next up, we've got Edmund is here. Edmund, go ahead with your question or with your comment. Edmund, let's see. You can go ahead and unmute yourself at this point. Ask your question.
Yes,
Yep.
thanks for doing this presentation. I'm really impressed with the thoroughness and the increased look at human factors. And just for the record, I'm a member of the Senior Advisory Commission and do attend the regular BPAP meetings, and I look forward to your attendance there. Specifically, I know that you paid a lot of attention to the role that the interaction between cars and bikes, particularly cars hitting bikes, but there's also bikes hitting cars, and that's more likely to happen when a driver or passenger opens their car door without looking and a biker is traveling along at almost any speed. It's pretty difficult to avoid an unexpected car door opening, which brings me to the subject of the buffering. Assuming that there's any amount, my preference would be no parking at all on Monroe, so that it's safest for bikers in either direction. But if there's to be an exception at any location, that's where special care has to be taken to be sure there's no chance of a bike into car door. And that means proper buffering so that there's no way that the person in the bike lane can come anywhere close to a large car door opening. So what are the specs for your clearances? Have you studied how wide the average car door opens when flung fully open? And what are the chances that that will get into the bike lane? I'd be interested to know that. And if you don't know, you need to study it. Any
Great.
comment?
Thanks, Edmund. Thanks for that question, that comment. It is something that has come up at both of our previous rounds of community meetings, certainly for people that have bicycled in Santa Clara or elsewhere. The threat of not seeing somebody in the car and having their door open suddenly and getting doored or having that collision is something that people hear about. It's a constant concern for people bicycling. Currently, our buffered bike lanes are 5 feet wide, and we average 3 foot wide for that painted buffer. And so it is something that, we got an 8 foot wide parking lane that would be striped on the inside of that parking lane to encourage cars to be parked as close to the curb as possible. And there would be a little bit of give between that 8 foot so that if cars are parked close to the curb, touching the curb, a car door may open into the bike lane, and bicyclists would want to bicycle kind of on the outer edge of that bike facility towards the buffer zone, which separates the bikes from the vehicle traffic. That's something that, again, could be evaluated again in the detailed design phase, but right now the concepts have that buffer space between the travel lane and the bikeway. So this is something that comes up constantly and that would continue to be evaluated in the detailed design. Ralph, do you have any other comments about kind of this dooring concern and the way that the concepts are laid out?
No, I think that's a good question. Definitely something to look at during the design phase if we get to that point. We do have, as Jeff mentioned, the 5 foot bike lane and the 3 foot buffer. So we have a little bit more space than a typical just striped bike lane without the buffer. So there is flexibility for bicyclists to move away from parked vehicles if they do see them.
Yeah, good feedback, good question. Thanks, Edmund, for that. Let's see. All right, we got some questions in the Q&A window here. All right, let's see.
Patrick, does Patrick have a follow-up question?
I think Patrick's got his hand up and he's got some questions in the Q&A. So maybe Patrick, I'm going to let you talk and we'll see if we can get to additional questions that you got. So go ahead, Patrick.
Hello, me again. So this time asking about some parking analysis as I put in the Q&A there. I think from the previous slides, you mentioned that there was no estimated effect for parking utilization in concepts A and B. I wasn't sure if that was, and the expectation was that the number of parking spaces would remain the same from no build to the buffered bike lane concepts, despite the parking protected buffered bike lane concept for safety reasons would also require some additional line of sight considerations at intersections, and curious about how the new California 20-foot parking restrictions within 20 feet of a crosswalk, how those restrictions play into the parking concepts. But as a cyclist myself, the parking protected bike lane concept is obviously the most appealing for, as I think you saw from the survey feedback as well. It drastically reduces the possibility of dooring, because most cars will be parking without a passenger on the right hand side of the vehicle opening a door suddenly into the bike lane that would be on the other side. But in addition to that, there are some concerns with visibility approaching an intersection. If there's parking as a cyclist, if there's parking to my left and vehicles to the left of that parking turning right, how that can be mitigated, how the collision avoidance there, if I'm going straight through an intersection and a travel lane is turning right, line of sight is the best way to reduce collisions there, unless there's actual physical mode separation. But wondering how that accounts into the parking analysis and the new 20-foot parking restrictions within crosswalks.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for the question. It is true. I think that what we've modeled here is just to show what the wholesale change of parking from one side of the street or the other would do under concept C, just so that we could give the public, the BPAC, and city council as decision makers information about what would that larger impact be. But you're right, at intersections and maybe at driveways under concept B, there would be a change in parking. It might just be a quarter of a parking space or a half of a parking space. Cumulatively, it may add up to several parking spaces. It's something that could be modeled, but I think on the whole, it's not going to drastically affect the availability, large scale of parking. So it's not something that we computed, but something that if City Council desired to go into more detail, could look at that. And that really looking at those details would be happen in a detailed design phase following this. And so Ralph mentioned before, if the city wanted to move forward, there would be additional engineering analysis and design that would go into really looking at each of these intersections, what it would look like, and if there would need to be any daylighting or removing parking. Currently, we looked at some intersections to evaluate kind of, would this new regulation about providing 20 feet of clear space of no parking up to a crosswalk really affect it? And typically there's already red curb painted that's generally at least 15 to 20 feet. So that's already kind of accommodated in existing conditions, but it's something that, again, would have to be evaluated down the road. So it's true, there would be additional parking removal under all these concepts, but at a much smaller fractional level for concepts A and B. So maybe that's something we need to clarify in the report that we write up. And so thanks for pointing that out. Great question. Ralph, anything else you wanted to add to that question from Patrick?
No, I think you covered it. It's a good point. I think it'll be minimal, the changes for A and B, in terms of parking when we look at the design phase. Looks like I don't know if there's any more questions or anything in the Q&A, Jeff, that we want
There's a question. Yep, some questions in the Q&A. Again, if folks who are joining us live would like to come off of mute to ask a question or provide key comments, you just need to raise your hand. There's a button at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom window that says raise hand, and let me know that you'd like to speak. Otherwise, we can answer questions in the Q&A window, which if you click the Q&A button, you can type in a question there. And so we have an anonymous attendee said, how will the bus stop be accommodated? So George, why don't you go back to let's go to concepts. Let's see. We go to concept A, and we can walk through how the bus stops will be accommodated on this corridor. Right. So for concept A, you can see here, we've shown at the top of the screen a bus stop on the on one side of Monroe to show what it would look like. Under this scenario, the bike lane would lose its buffer, so it'd just be a standard bicycle lane. It would be dashed, and in this concept, colored in green, and this would be the mixing zone or a conflict zone, where the bus would cross over the bike lane to come flush with the curb to service a bus stop. And so a bicyclist would proceed straight, and the bus would yield to bicyclists in the lane and cross over. If you go to the next concept, concept B, this is where we have 2 lanes, center turn lane and parking protected bike lanes. Under this scenario, the bike lane would be flush against the curb, and it would be in the middle of the bus stop. So here the bicycles would proceed through the bus stop, and a bus would come, stop there, pick and drop off passengers, and then merge back into the travel lane. If a bicyclist was coming behind a bus, they would need to wait until the bus had taken its passengers or people had left the bus, and then proceed straight. Concept C, very similar to concept A. The bike lane would be on the outside of the bus stop. So again, that dashed mixing zone there. So that's the 3 ways that these concepts would interact with the bus stops along Monroe. Great. Next question on the Q&A window comes from Tom. Will this project be contract out, or will the city staff do this? Ralph, do you want to answer that question about kind of next phases? I think that may apply to the detailed design along with the construction.
Yeah, for something like this, if we're talking about design and construction, this most likely will be a subcontractor or consultant to perform those tasks.
Great. And, again, you'd have to go through finding additional funding for both those phases. There would be additional public input in the detailed design phase, and then it would be going through procurement and going through bidding for construction. All right. Answer a few more on the Q&A window, and then we'll go back. I see Chuck with a hand raised, so just one second, Chuck. And Chuck, you've got this next question, so maybe you can speak to it. When Monroe Street crosses Lawrence into Sunnyvale, it changes name to Reed. Sunnyvale has implemented a road diet with bike lanes on Reed. Have you consulted Sunnyvale to learn from their experience? Let's see, I'm going to take you off mute, Chuck, see if you have anything else to add, but we can get to that question as well. Go ahead, Chuck.
Okay, the question pretty much says it. Since Sunnyvale's already done it, we can learn from their experience. It would be good to have a unified bicycle corridor that goes from city to city.
Absolutely. So thanks for that question, Chuck. Ralph, we can talk. We've not, in terms of the consult teams, we've not interviewed Sunnyvale staff about their experience with Reed. I do know when the city was looking at Prune Ridge, we did talk with City of San Jose staff, because Prune Ridge similarly changes to a road diet condition in the city. It's heading, and we talked with City of San Jose staff about their experience, and it's been largely positive in terms of seeing travel speeds reduced and collisions reduced, is what the report was back from city staff there. So, Ralph, do you have any additional insights into City of Sunnyvale staff about Reed?
No, I think you said it, Jeff. The idea was for us to have one continuous bike facility. So we did know that if you continue on Reed and into Old San Francisco and Sunnyvale, they do have continuous bike facilities. So our thought was to continue this one piece on Monroe. So it is continuous. I think this project also stemmed from the bike plan update. So they looked at that as well as seeing what type of facilities we can put on this segment. So one of the things we're looking at was to actually improve on the bike facility by having a buffer bike lane or a class 4 parking protected bike lane. So I think we're taking a step further in this segment than what's available on either sides of this corridor.
Thank you. Edmund asks in the Q&A window, will bike lanes be painted green adjacent to all locations for parked cars? The answer is currently under these concepts, no. There would not be green paint at the locations near parked cars, just in those locations where there'd be a mixing zone or a conflict point where vehicles would be crossing over the bike facilities, such as at bus stops. Edmund also asks, have you considered all bike lane users, including recumbent trikes, which are wider and heavier than a standard bike? Great question, Edmund, and I believe this came up when we were meeting with the Senior Advisory Committee as well. And we've seen folks using recumbent bikes and trikes, which do have that wider wheelbase. That's, I think, one of the reasons we are looking at upgrading where there are just standard bike lanes to these buffered bike lanes or protected bike facilities that would be wider with that buffer zone space there to accommodate these wider bike users. And so hopefully that answers that question. It's something that we are looking at and would be accommodated under these scenarios. It's also something that the city would need to look at when it's designing the intersections, which is not part of this study, but at a detailed design phase, thinking about how drivers can see, especially recumbent bikes, which are lower to the ground, and make sure that there's good line of sight between drivers, especially drivers turning right, and these bicyclists. Great question, great comment. Tom, I see your hand up. Go ahead, Tom.
Hello. Again, I've just recently got a very interesting report. You probably already have it, but it talks about AI vision-based light signals. I think that's the state of the art, and I was wondering whether or not our intersections will accommodate that as well, working with bike lanes, or would that just go on the next phase? In other words, changing the light signal.
Great question. Signal changes and kind of syncing up signals, that's something that is not part of our study, but it's something that the city could evaluate in terms of making those changes or changing the light sequencing or connected signals. Ralph, any other thoughts or updates you want to say about how the signals could work together or using AI, which is something I hadn't heard before, but I'm sure that that's coming in terms of the next wave of intelligent traffic systems?
That's a very good question. I am not with the signal group here at the city. I'm sure they've been looking into that as well. So we can take a look into that for the design of this project if it moves forward.
I see. So that would be looked at. It could be considered in this project at this level of kind of analyzing the signals on the intersection, because I've seen this in other cities where they pre-warn the driver in a car that there's a bike lane that is on their right, so to speak, and to give way, the bike is approaching. So they have these blinking lights that actually state the bike is approaching, and so it holds the driver until the lane is clear. All right, thank you so much for your time again.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And just to confirm, it would not be part of this study, but at a subsequent study phase or design phase, if the city decided to move forward, that's when looking at the signals would be evaluated. Let's see, I've got, Edmund has got something in the Q&A window here. Recumbent trikers need better access to all street crossing buttons. We do not easily dismount to reach those buttons. A great comment and something in the detailed design phase when you're looking at those buttons, how high they should be and kind of where they should be located, and if there needs to be any extenders to better access that for people crossing the street by walking or for people on bicycles. So great comment, something that please keep that comment alive if the city moves into a design phase to evaluate that. I had some updates. George has gone in and looked back at some of our analysis about the overnight parking utilization, and the average overnight utilization for parking is 43% on both weeknights and weekend nights. So that's the overnight when we expect the highest number of residents using on-street parking. And so again, that's across the entire corridor, certainly at some locations, especially where there's either less availability or higher demand on the western side of the corridor, those might be even higher. And so we don't want to diminish the fact that there would be impacts with each of these concepts, whether it's impacts to congestion and travel time getting across the corridor or traffic impacts to parking. with some of these scenarios. So hopefully we've shared that. We want to make sure that decision makers and the public are fully aware of both the benefits of each of these concepts and also the impacts that it would have to people driving, walking, and bicycling. Let's see, other questions or comments? Again, you can raise your hand to be recognized. I don't see anything in the Q&A window. I don't see anybody with their hand up. We can stick around for more time if folks want to think through a question to formulate or feedback to provide. But again, I want to direct people to the website and really to our survey. Again, the most important thing you can do is to, if you're on the call with us tonight, to click on the link that George sent out or use your mobile device to use the QR code here to take the preferred concept survey. That will help us and the city consolidate feedback and share with City Council and the BPAC kind of what is the community's preferred concept. Share that out, please, with your neighbors, with your colleagues at work, with your church, with your different social and civic communities. Anybody that, you know, that cares about driving, walking, bicycling on this corridor, we want to make sure that they take the survey and have a chance to do that. That'll be open for several weeks. So please go ahead and take that survey. Ralph, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you everyone for spending part of your evening with us and continuing with us on this project. As Jeff mentioned, the survey is very important. We're looking forward to see what the community thinks about these concepts. And thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Again, if you'd like to drop off, we'll wish you well. If you want to stick around and ask any questions, we'll be happy to stick around. Currently, the survey will be open until February 25th. So you've got over a month to complete the survey. Again, it's live right now. There's a link on the project website. We've shared it in the chat window, and also this QR code will take you to the survey. All right, I don't see any other hands up or questions. So we wish you all the best tonight. Thank you for participating and for joining us and sharing your feedback. Have a wonderful night.